The rescue trucks kept shutting themselves down to prevent rollover. The old tractor only cared about moving forward. 43 people were on that bus. Commuters, shift workers, and travelers heading home for the weekend. One driver who hadn't moved his hands from the steering wheel in 71 minutes. The rain had been falling for 3 days. Not the dramatic kind, not the kind that makes the news before it arrives. This was the quiet kind, the persistent kind, the kind that old-timers in Dunmore County, West Virginia, called mountain drinking rain. It soaked into the hillside the way water soaks into old wood, slowly, completely, until the wood forgets what it was like to be dry. At 9:49 on the night of October 14th, the western face of Spruce Gap gave up. No explosion. No crack of thunder. Just a low groan, 11 seconds, like something very large and very old exhaling for the final time. Then the hillside moved. Not fast, not violent, steady and deliberate, the way a glacier moves, the way debt moves. Spruce Gap Road, the only road connecting Holland Creek to the town of Gable Falls, disappeared in 4 minutes. The 10:15 Nightlink coach from the Gable Falls Transit Authority was sitting on top of it. Driver Bernard Stout, 57, had run this route 200 times in 14 years. He knew every curve, every low-hanging branch, every patch of road that turned slick after rain. He hit the brakes when the ground started moving. The front right wheel dropped into the fracture. The bus stopped, tilted, on the right side, a 58-foot drop. Bernard didn't look at the drop. He looked in the rearview mirror. 40 passengers. Some screaming, some frozen. One man in the third row holding the passenger next to him by the arm, keeping them from sliding toward the window on the low side. He picked up the radio. His hands were not shaking. Dispatch. Coach 402, Gable Falls Transit. Need immediate assistance. Spruce Gap Road, mile marker 7.4. Bus is tilted toward the ravine. 43 people on board. At the Dunmore County Emergency Communications Center, dispatcher Carol Fenn received the call at 9:53 p.m. She looked at the map, the weather grid, the equipment roster. She hit the red alarm. Inside the bus, Bernard did something no protocol had ever trained him to do. He talked. Everybody listen to me. Nobody moves. Nobody stands up. I need everyone to sit on the floor and lean against the left wall. Do it slow. Don't rush it. His voice was even. The way a man's voice gets when he has decided that panic is a luxury he cannot afford right now. The bus creaked. The hillside continued drinking rain. Temperature, 43 degrees Fahrenheit. Falling. The headlights cut through the dark and hit nothing but mud and water. No reflectors. No road. No sign that a road had ever existed. 43 people waited. West Virginia State Emergency Response dispatched Heavy Response Team 3 out of Marlinton at 10:07 p.m. 3 vehicles, Axis Rescue Technologies, Terrain Master Z, the newest generation of heavy rescue rigs, purchased the previous year under a state contract worth $315 million. Each unit, 8.4 meters long, 12 tons, 6-wheel full drive, LED array lighting, thermal camera, and the centerpiece, the Dynabalance system, 4th-generation active stability management software, designed to prevent rollover on extreme terrain. The Axis Rescue brochure read, "Built for the terrain humans fear most." Captain Silas Drummond, 46, sat in the command vehicle. 19 years in emergency response. He had stopped reading brochures a long time ago. He trusted his equipment. They reached the base of Spruce Gap at 10:26. That was the last minute anything went according to plan. Specialist Doug Mercer put the first truck into the mud at 10:29. Slow entry, deliberate, the way you test ice before you walk on it. He felt the wheels sink, maybe 2 inches, and eased the throttle forward. The terrain master moved, 14 meters. Then the Dynabalance system woke up. The dashboard lit yellow. Surface friction, coefficient 0.14. Minimum threshold, 0.18. Dynabalance engaged. Wheel torque limited. Power to the wheels dropped to 30%. The truck slowed, stopped. Mercer tried the throttle. Wheels spun in place. He reached for the manual terrain override, the button that was supposed to let a trained operator make his own call. The screen read, "Manual override unavailable. Terrain class Delta protocol active." He called Drummond. "Truck 1 is locked, sir. System won't let me in." 2 seconds of silence on the radio. Try truck 2. Truck 2 approached from a different angle, a section of mud that looked harder, more compressed. Specialist Reese Cafferty got 11 meters before the same yellow light came on. Same dashboard, same numbers, same locked screen. Truck 3 was driven by Specialist Ann Yarrow, 14 years in the field, the most experienced operator on the team. She didn't try the obvious approach. She swung wide to the left, hunting for the firmest possible line, the place where the mud was thinnest over the hardest ground underneath. The LiDAR camera on the front of the truck scanned the terrain. Processed, calculated. The screen read projected rollover probability, 38%. Proceeding not recommended. The truck never moved. 3 vehicles, $315 million, standing in a row at the edge of the mud. Warning lights blinking yellow in the rain. Generators humming. Just humming. Drummond stepped down from the command vehicle, mud over his ankles immediately. He stood there and looked toward the bus, 340 meters out, its headlights still burning, pale and small in the dark like a candle someone had left on a window ledge. 340 meters. A man on foot could walk it in 4 minutes. 3 of the most advanced rescue vehicles in the state of West Virginia could not cross it at all. He keyed the radio. Dispatch, this is Captain Drummond. All 3 units are blocked. Terrain system lockout. We need an alternative. Is air available? Carol Fenn's voice came back flat and fast. Negative, Captain. Cloud ceiling at 110 feet. No helicopter visibility. I'm working alternative equipment. Stand by. Stand by. Drummond found Yarrow standing beside truck 3, arms folded, staring at the mud the way a person stares at a problem they already know the answer to and don't like it. Anything we're missing? He asked. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the mud, looked at her dashboard, looked at the mud again. The system is reading this correctly, sir. The friction coefficient is what it is. If we go in, 38% is a real number. 38% rollover on our trucks. Yes, sir. What's the probability that 43 people don't make it if we stay here? Yarrow said nothing. Not because she didn't know the answer, because that question was not in the Dynabalance software. The software had not been written to ask it. The software knew how much risk existed. It did not know what the risk was worth. Nobody had programmed that part. Reporter Renata Voss from WVBN arrived at 10:41. She had grown up in Dunmore County. She knew this mud. She had worn it home on her boots 100 times as a kid. She waded through it without breaking stride and came to stand beside Drummond. She looked at the 3 trucks. Why aren't they moving? Terrain assessment. It's been 14 minutes. I know. There are 43 people on that bus. I know that too, Ms. Voss. She didn't ask anything else. She raised her camera and held it steady. The shot she framed needed no caption, no music, no narration. 3 rescue vehicles worth $1 million each, warning lights blinking slow and yellow, standing perfectly still while 340 meters away, a pair of headlights flickered in the dark like something trying not to go out. She let the camera run. The county dispatch center worked the phones. Renner Brothers Logging had tracked equipment. Their operators were home, 80 minutes away minimum. Caldwell Grading had a bulldozer down for engine work. The County Volunteer Corps had no heavy machinery. The clock read 10:52, 63 minutes since Bernard Stout had picked up that radio. Inside the bus, Bernard was tracking the tilt with a small torpedo level he kept in the dash drawer, the kind of tool a careful man carries without ever being able to explain exactly why. He had carried this one for 14 years. The bubble was reading right of center. It had been reading right of center when Drummond arrived. It was reading further right of center now. The mud under the front right wheel was still sinking. Not fast, just steady. The way Det moves. Harlan Pruitt didn't sleep well on heavy rain nights. Not worry. Something older than that. 73 years on Appalachian ground had wired a low-frequency alertness into him that switched on when the rain crossed a certain threshold and the mountains started doing things mountains do when nobody is watching. He was on the porch with a cup of coffee gone cold when he heard it. 9:49 p.m. Not thunder, not a tree coming down. A low, sustained groan, 11 seconds. The sound a very large thing makes when it has been holding on for a very long time and finally decides to stop. He had heard that sound twice before in 73 years. He set the cup down. He didn't rush. Rushing is for people who haven't figured out what they're doing yet. Heavy flannel over the shirt he was wearing. Steel thread lace-up boots. The flashlight his granddaughter sent last Christmas. The 30-meter steel cable in the barn corner. 12 millimeter, no rust. He stood in the barn doorway and looked at the Oliver Super 88. Open cab, 4-cylinder diesel. No electronics beyond an oil gauge and a temperature dial. The rubber tires had been replaced years ago with steel wheels of his own fabrication. 10 curved spade blades welded to a rim in a pattern he'd sketched from a photograph of a World War II farm tractor in an old mechanics magazine. Slow, rough, useless on pavement. In mud, the blades found the firm layer underneath and held it the way a hand holds a rope. He checked the oil. Good. The belt. Tight. Engine turned over twice. Then settled, low even, unhurried. The sound of something that knew exactly what it was. Harlan pulled into the rain. His property sat 1.4 miles from Spruce Gap Road. But he had a track. Dirt, hand-cut, 35 years of maintenance, used for pulling timber out of the woodlot. No county map. No GPS database. It existed because one man had spent enough time on a piece of ground to know where a path could go. 22 minutes later, he came out at the edge of the mud from a direction nobody in the rescue team had been watching. Specialist Yarrow saw the light first. Single low beam. Wrong shape. Wrong sound entirely. Mercer raised his binoculars. Tractor, sir. Old one. No cab. Who's driving? Old man. The Oliver 88 didn't slow at the pavement edge. Didn't stop to assess. It went straight into the mud. Steel blades planted. Tractor moved. Drummond watched the incline reading on his dash. 8 degrees. 10. 12. The tractor did not stop. Harlan killed the engine 60 meters from the bus. Stepped down, waited to Drummond without introducing himself. Looked at the bus, read the angle, read the ground, read the darkness on the right side where the drop was, for 40 seconds without speaking. Then he looked left. Up the slope, the black oak, 31 meters upslope, trunk as wide as 2 men standing together, vertical on exposed limestone. He had tried to remove that tree 28 years ago, dug 6 hours before finding the root system, 3 meters down into fractured rock. That tree was not going anywhere. He turned to Drummond. You have cable on those trucks. 30 meters on truck 1. Bring it here. Drummond looked at the mud. The tractor. The bus. Yarrow. Get the cable. Before we go any further, nobody called Harlan Pruitt that night. No dispatch, no contact list. He was not a registered volunteer. He held no emergency certification. He heard a sound, did the math, drove into the dark. Not, is this my job? Not, am I covered if something goes wrong? Just I can, so I will. If that pulls at something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment. That's the only kind of story I tell here. Yarrow brought the cable herself. Waded thigh-deep in one section. Didn't break pace. Harlan spliced it to his own 30 meters without looking at his hands. 47 meters total. Then he walked to the black oak and tied the first end. Double-wrapped. Crossed. Locked back on itself. A variant of the timber hitch with a half-hitch locking wrap. Old-growth logging technique. Largely obsolete since the 1970s. Under load, it doesn't loosen. It tightens. He carried the other end to the bus. Alone, crouched under the front frame with his flashlight, moved the beam slowly, not looking for the standard tow point, looking for a specific point on the left forward rail, a point that would create rotational force, not linear force, not a pull, a turn. Straight back wouldn't work. The front right wheel was sunk 4 inches into saturated ground. A straight pull lifts the wheel but sends the rear swinging right with nothing to stop it. Clockwise rotation. Right rear corner over the edge first, then everything else follows. You don't drag a tilted bus away from a cliff. You rotate it. You find the geometry that pivots the nose left, toward the slope, toward solid ground, slowly enough that it never accelerates toward the drop. He found the point, tied off, stood up, walked back, climbed onto the iron seat, looked at the bus, the oak, the cable running slack between them in the rain. Get your people back, he said to Drummond. Conversational, the way a man asks you to move your car. Drummond moved his people back. Harlan engaged the gear. The cable went taut, not all at once. Gradually, the way a guitar string tightens when you turn the peg. 1 revolution of the steel wheels. 2. The slack disappeared meter by meter until the cable was a straight line running from the tractor through the oak to the bus frame. Then the sound changed. A low metallic singing. The sound of 47 meters of 12mm steel carrying a load it was built to carry. Everyone on that hillside heard it. Nobody spoke. Renata Voss held her camera steady. Drummond stood with his arms at his sides. Yarrow didn't blink. The oak didn't move. 3 meters of root in fractured limestone. 28 years ago, Harlan had spent 6 hours trying to prove otherwise. The tree had won that argument. It was winning this one, too. The tractor moved forward, left and slightly uphill. Each blade of the steel wheel found the firm layer underneath the mud. Planted, pushed, lifted, planted again. No spinning. No hesitation. The Oliver 88 had no sensor to tell it the friction coefficient was insufficient. It had no software to calculate rollover probability. It had Harlan Pruitt on the seat. That was the entire safety system. Inside the bus, Bernard Stout felt it before he saw it. A change in pressure. The weight that had been pushing him into the right side of his seat for 79 minutes began, almost imperceptibly, to redistribute. He looked at the torpedo level on the dash. The bubble moved. A millimeter, then another, toward center. He closed his eyes, opened them, kept watching. 19 minutes? That is how long it took. Not dramatic, not fast. The bus didn't lurch free. It didn't make a sound worth remembering. It simply rotated, 1 inch, then another, the front left swinging toward the slope, the front right lifting out of the hole it had been sinking into for the past 81 minutes, the whole 14-ton machine pivoting around a geometry that one man had worked out by walking a line 3 times in the rain and nodding to himself. At the 17-minute mark, the right rear wheel found solid ground. At 19 minutes, the front right wheel set down on hardpan. The bus was level. The ravine was on the left now, not the right. Bernard Stout put the bus in park, sat back, looked at the ceiling for 3 seconds. Then he opened the door and told his passengers they could move. The sound that came off that hillside when 43 people stepped onto solid ground was not a cheer exactly. It was something rawer than that. The sound people make when something that was about to happen didn't happen. Drummond's team moved in. Blankets, first aid. Families and loved ones who had driven up from Gable Falls and climbed through the mud on foot were already at the perimeter, calling names into the dark. 1 passenger with a panic response, 3 with minor abrasions. Bernard Stout with a numb left hand from gripping the wheel for 1 hour and 20 minutes. That was the full casualty list. Harlan shut the engine off. He didn't join the noise. He stepped down from the iron seat, walked to the oak and untied the cable from the base. Checked both ends for fraying. Clean? He coiled it over his shoulder and walked back to the tractor. Drummond found him there, stood beside him without speaking for a moment. Then, you used the tree as a pulley. Yes. Where did you learn that? Harlan set the cable on the rear rack, pulling a white oak log out of a hollow. 1988. Log was heavier than I thought. Tractor couldn't pull straight. I looked around, saw a standing tree at the right angle, and thought. He paused. Log came out. Silence. Cold air. Old metal. Our trucks couldn't get in, Drummond said. The stability system. 38% rollover probability. I know. I watched. The system was protecting my operators. Harlan looked at him. Your system knew how much risk there was, he said. It didn't know what the risk was worth. He pulled a sleeve of crackers from his jacket pocket, sat down on the tractor step, and ate. Renata Voss posted the footage at 6:17 a.m. No music, no narration, no lower third graphics explaining what you were looking at. Just 19 uncut minutes of an old man on an old tractor doing what $3 million of modern equipment could not. By 10 a.m., it had 1.9 million views. By dark, it had 9. That evening, Owen Gratch appeared on a Charleston news program. 41 years old, navy suit, hair close-cut and neat. The particular posture of a man who has been media-trained within an inch of his life. He sat across from the anchor with both hands flat on the desk and spoke in the measured cadence of someone who had rehearsed this exact conversation. The Dyna balance system performed exactly as designed, he said. In those conditions, friction coefficient below 0.18, saturated post-slide terrain, the rollover risk was real. The system protected our operators. That is what it was built to do. But a 65-year-old tractor got through. Gratch nodded, slowly, the nod of a man buying 1 second to retrieve a prepared answer. That tractor had no cab, no harness, no occupant protection of any kind. If it had rolled, the operator would have had nothing. We cannot and should not engineer systems that accept that level of risk. So in your view, Mr. Pruitt acted recklessly? One beat of silence. I respect his courage. But it was not a certified procedure. In a diner called Myrna's, 5 miles from Spruce Gap, a table of men watched that interview on the TV mounted in the corner. Nobody said anything when it ended. One man picked up his coffee cup, set it back down without drinking. That was the whole review. 3 weeks later, the West Virginia Legislative Audit Committee convened a formal hearing on the Axis RESC contract. Contract Clause 3.7b. Terrain Master 6 units shall be capable of conducting rescue operations on post-event Class Delta terrain, including saturated mudslide conditions. Spruce Gap Road, night of October 14th. Class Delta, saturated mudslide, 3 units, 0 entry. Gratch arrived with 2 attorneys and a tabbed binder 4 inches thick. Harlan Pruitt arrived alone. Flannel shirt, lace-up boots with dried mud still on the soles from a field he'd been working that morning. He sat down in front of the committee and put nothing on the table. Committee chair, Senator Doris Wainwright, looked at him over her glasses. Mr. Pruitt, were you afraid that night? Yes. But you went in anyway. Afraid and uncertain are different things. I was afraid. I wasn't uncertain. She wrote something down. The questions for Gratch were shorter and harder. Did the Terrain Master 6 units enter the mud? Gratch opened his binder, turned a page, turned it back. The Dynabalance system engaged to prevent. Mr. Gratch, did the units enter the mud? The smile was gone. No. Then the contract was not fulfilled. The room held that sentence for a moment the way a cold room holds a sound. The committee's finding, Axis RESC Technologies to refund 35% of the contract value, $1.1 million. Mandatory field testing on saturated terrain required for all future rescue equipment contracts in the state. Owen Gratch left the building without speaking to press. 8 weeks later, he was no longer listed as chief engineer on the Axis RESC website. The donated funds came to $184,000, an online collection that Harlan's granddaughter Kay had set up without asking him, which he discovered only when she drove up to tell him about it in person. He was fixing fence at the time. People want to do something for you, Grandpa. The transit company's coach is probably totaled, he said. People still need a way to get to the city for work. Kay looked at him. You're serious? He went back to the fence post. That was the end of that conversation. The Oliver 88 is still in the barn. Harlan hasn't repainted it, hasn't put a plaque on it, hasn't done a single thing to mark it as different from what it was before October 14th, which is a machine that needs its oil checked, its belt inspected, and its wheel pressure tested every morning before work. Same as always, an engineering professor at Virginia Tech who built a case study around the Spruce Gap incident wrote to ask if Harlan would speak to his students. Harlan wrote back by hand. Mailed it. I don't have much to teach about engineering. The only thing I know is this. A machine can calculate how likely it is to fail. Only a person can decide whether that risk is worth taking. If you're teaching people to build machines, that might be the most important thing they ever hear. H. Pruitt, we are building smarter systems every year. Systems that calculate risk faster and more accurately than any human brain. Most of the time, those systems are right. Most of the time, letting them decide is the correct call. But they all share one blind spot. They know how much. They don't know why. They cannot weigh a friction coefficient against 43 people sitting in the dark. They cannot feel the difference between a risk that should be avoided and a risk that needs to be taken. That calculation requires something that cannot be coded, a person who knows what is at stake and is willing to stand behind the answer. Harlan Pruitt was that person on October 14th, not because he was fearless, not because he was reckless, because he was present, because he had spent 73 years paying close enough attention to the world around him that when the moment came, he already knew what to do. That kind of knowledge doesn't come from a classroom. It comes from showing up every day, for a very long time. If this story stayed with you, If it pulled at something you recognize in yourself or in someone you know, leave it in the comments. I read everyone, and if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Stories like this one are rare. I don't want you to miss the next one.